Chapter 11. Grameen in the 90s. In December 1990, the military government that had ruled Bangladesh for 10 years was toppled in a popular uprising. The major political parties that had campaigned for a return to democracy agreed to support a caretaker government headed by a former Supreme Court justice. The following February, the caretaker government organized an election that remained mercifully peaceful and resulted in a victory for Begum Khaleda Zia and her Bangladesh Nationalist Party. Sheikh Hasina, the leader of the second and largest party, was wise enough to honor Zia's victory. She became Prime Minister 5 years later. In a third world country like Bangladesh, democracy allows the poor to take advantage of their greatest asset, their large numbers. But to do so, they must be actively organized. I knew how crucial it was that all Grameen borrowers' voices be heard, and I asked our staff to work during the weeks before the 1991 election to ensure that 100% of all adult Grameen family members were registered to vote. I also recommended that each center collectively decide which candidate the members would support and that they parade to the voting booths together as a voting bloc. Even if political office seekers did not take them seriously in that election, they would in the future. I made it clear to everyone that Grameen staff should not attempt to influence which candidates our borrowers supported in any way. Selecting leaders through democratic means was not new to Grameen borrowers. All Grameen groups elect a chairperson and secretary, and each center chooses a center chief and deputy center chief from among the group chairpersons. So I was not surprised to see how enthusiastically our borrowers embraced the idea of exercising their democratic rights in the national election of 1991. The members of many centers paraded to the voting booths with banners reminding everyone that they were from a Grameen Bank center and were voting as a bloc. In some cases, local politicians asked if they could address Grameen center meetings. The real proof of Grameen's influence, however, came after the election, when several defeated candidates came to my office to complain that the Grameen borrowers in their constituency had not supported them. I always told these politicians that they should be talking to the Grameen borrowers, not to me, since I was not the one who cast the ballots. The election of 1991 also served as a warm-up for the crucial election of 1992, 1996 and 1997. In 1992, some 400 Grameen borrowers were elected to union councils, and in 1996, Grameen borrowers led the way to an almost unthinkable feat. More women voted in the national election than men, which helped to nearly wipe a political party that had taken positions against women's rights out of parliament. In addition, over 1,750 Grameen members, 1,485 female and 268 male, and 1,570 members of Grameen borrowers' families were elected to local offices in 1997. Two Grameen male borrowers and 57 male family members were voted in as chiefs of local bodies. These successful candidates constituted 6% of the total elected representatives in all the local bodies in the country. These astonishing results proved to us that once Grameen borrowers grew in self-esteem, they would readily express their opinions. We were so pleased by the results of the February 1991 election and by the continuing expansion of our microcredit program that we were caught off guard by a series of setbacks that would make 1991 one of our hardest years ever. The first of these hit when the newly elected government decided to forgive all loans from government banks that were under 5,000 taka, approximately $125 at the time. Though this policy may sound as though it would benefit the poor, in reality almost 100% of these loans made by government banks went to land-owning, wealthier members of the population. But because most of our loans were also under 5,000 taka, many Grameen borrowers thought that their loans had been forgiven. It was extremely difficult to explain to our borrowers why the rich people in their villages were getting their loans written off, but they were not. Yet we had no choice. Grameen did not survive on government subsidies, and writing off all our loans under $125 would have meant the end of us. In the end, borrowers accepted our arguments, but it was a bitter pill for them to swallow. It is to be hoped that in the future the Bangladeshi government and all governments in countries with microcredit programs will think twice before trying to garner trying to garner popularity by forgiving loans. Even with the loan situation settled, our problems were far from over. On April 30, a cyclone hit the southern region of Bangladesh, killing 110,000 people in one terrible night. The cyclone hit at 2 a.m., catching much of the population unawares. Many Grameen Bank workers and managers were badly hurt. After recovering from their shock, those who could went out in boats looking for survivors. Bloated bodies of dead people and animals floated around the flooded remains of former houses. The survivors were led to dry land. Many of them suffered from severe shock, fearing that looters would steal their few remaining belongings. Some refused to leave their devastated houses. In the hours directly following the flood caused by the cyclone, many traumatized survivors died as they could not bring themselves to make immediate provisions for shelter and food. When I arrived in Chittagong to assess the devastation, I was overcome with emotion. One woman told me that she had been running with her child to the cyclone shelter only to have the child blown right out of her arms by the high winds. After a few minutes, she realized that if she did not enter the shelter immediately, she would be killed. She never saw her child again. We waived all the usual restrictions that apply to housing loans and declared our intention to ensure not just that our borrowers rebuild what they had lost, but that they built something better. Many of our borrowers did just that. They also restarted their income-generating enterprises and began making token payments on their loans. It always surprises me how quickly our staff and borrowers are able to recover from natural disasters. Human beings are extremely creative and resilient, especially when they are operating within an institutional framework that encourages and supports their actions. Every time I hear people arguing that Grameen will collapse when another disaster hits Bangladesh, I respond that Grameen and its borrowers will emerge from our rehabilitation efforts stronger than we were before. And every time this has proven to be the case. By 1994, we had fully recovered from the challenges of the decade's beginning and were enjoying our best financial year ever. We had disbanded our donor consortium the previous year and were operating on purely commercial terms. 2 years later, in April 1996, we extended our $1 billion in loans to one of our 2 million borrowers. It was a thrilling moment. A project that had started with a spontaneous $27 loan from my own pocket had reached its billionth dollar. Just over 2 years later, we launched our $2 billionth. Grameen was picking up steam. And when I went to the villages, I saw how many of our borrowers had not only crossed the poverty line but left it far behind. I met borrowers whose weekly installment, representing about 2% of the loans they were making payments on, was more than 500 taka, $12, and heard them tell me that their first loan from Grameen 10 years earlier had been 500 taka. Their capacity to borrow, invest, and repay had increased 50-fold in 10 years. One such wonderful success story comes from Murshida Begum, who was featured in a PBS documentary on microlending called To Our Credit. To our credit, though Murshida's story may strike some as exceptional, it really is a microcosm, MICROCOSM, a microcosm of what goes on in Grameen, how people are able to reach their full potential much more easily after accessing credit. Murshida was born into a poor family of 8 children. Neither her father nor grandfather owned any farmland. At 15, she was married to a man from a nearby village who worked as an unskilled laborer in a factory. The first few years of the marriage went relatively well, but things turned sour when Murshida began having children. Just as their family expenses went up, her husband started bringing home less and less money. Finally, it became clear that he was a compulsive gambler. During the 1974 famine, he was given a company bonus of 1,800 taka. He lost it all gambling. When Murshida complained her husband beat her, to earn some extra money, Murshida took up spinning raw cotton into yarn. She worked on contract for other people and was paid very little, sometimes no more than a handful of broken rice. Still, the work prevented her from starving. She considered other options, working as a domestic servant for a rich family or begging. But what would happen to her children? One day, Murshida's husband came home after a week's absence and complained that there was not enough food for him. Murshida had cooked up something modest and had not eaten the entire day. Angry, her husband beat her and then left, saying he would return later in the morning. That day there was a thunderstorm, and as her husband had sold the roof of their house to pay gambling debts, Murshida and her 3 children were soaked, S-O-A-K-E-D, soaked. At that moment, Murshida decided that something had to change. When her husband returned at midnight, Murshida confronted him. "You have only brought a small quantity of flattened rice for your daughter," she remembers saying, "but nothing for me. Yet everyone in the village says you earn a lot of money." Her husband flew into a rage and beat her. Then he divorced her on the spot and told her to leave the house. "What about the children?" Murshida asked. You can throw them into the river and let them drown, for all I care, he responded. Murshida sent word to her brother, who offered to take her into his home. Once she had moved in, Murshida found some more work spinning on contract. She heard about the Grameen Bank when it came to her village. Initially, the village leaders opposed Grameen and tried to prevent it from opening centers. One Grameen worker discouraged Murshida from joining, thinking she would move back to her husband's village. But Murshida stopped another bank worker on the village path and begged him to give her money. I told him I would swim across the river to attend Grameen Bank meetings if necessary. I told him that I wanted to follow him to whatever he was going to form a group so I could join. I told him that he must give me money, otherwise I would not be able to survive with my children. He said I could not form a group right then, but that he would come to my home and form a group in a few days, and he really came. At first Murshida borrowed 1,000 taka to purchase a goat, and she paid off the loan in 6 months with the profits from selling the milk. She was left with a goat, a kid, and no debt. Encouraged, she borrowed 2,000 taka, bought raw cotton and a spinning wheel, and began manufacturing ladies' scarves. She now sells her scarves wholesale for 100 taka with tassels, 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 and 50 taka without. Murshida's business has grown so much that during peak periods she employs as many as 25 women in her village to manufacture scarves. In addition, she has bought an acre of farmland with her profits, built a house with a Grameen Bank housing loan, and set up her brothers in businesses that include sari trading and raw cotton trading. Murshida has also emerged as a leader in her center. She was elected center chief several times. Wow, this is very inspiring. To encourage successful borrowers like Murshida, Grameen started a variety of new loan programs in the 1990s. These included seasonal loans for borrowers who were sharecroppers or who had bought some land since joining Grameen. We also established a tube well loan program for borrowers who needed $50 to $100 to sink a hand-powered well to access safe drinking water. Our new family loan program enabled borrowers to take out loans for family members' income-generating projects, and our equipment and cattle leasing program allowed borrowers to slowly purchase costly equipment and livestock through a lease-to-own TOWN, a lease-to-own agreement with us. Borrowers used this program to buy such diverse items as video cameras to record the weddings of upper-class people, power tillers, and irrigation pumps for cultivation, baby taxis for transportation services, rice mills, photocopy machines, small herds of better bred cattle, and much more. Grameen borrowers were constantly branching out into new, creative money-making schemes, and we wanted to help them leave the poverty line so far behind that their young children would barely remember what it felt like to be born poor. Though we wanted to encourage our most successful borrowers to take out bigger and bigger loans, we did not abandon those who were still starting the struggle against poverty. We declared a new goal: to make every Grameen branch poverty-free within an allotted period of time. How did we define poverty-free? After interviewing many borrowers about what a poverty-free life meant to them, we developed a set of 10 indicators that our staff and outside evaluators could use to measure whether a family in rural Bangladesh lived a poverty-free life. These indicators are number 1, having a house with a tin roof. Number 2, having beds or cots for all members of the family. Number 3, having access to safe drinking water. Number 4, having access to a sanitary latrine. Number 5, having all school-aged children attending school. Number 6, having sufficient warm clothing for the winter. Number 7, having mosquito nets. Number 8, having some vegetable garden. Number 9, having no food shortages, even during the most difficult time of a very difficult year. And number 10, having sufficient income earning opportunities for all adult members of the family. We will be monitoring these criteria on our own and are inviting local and international researchers to help us track our successes and setbacks as we head toward our goal of a poverty-free Bangladesh. As I thought more about what we had accomplished at the Grameen Bank, I wanted to convey to other economists and policymakers that our success was not an aberration, but rather not an aberration, AVERRATION, not an aberration, but rather a specific example of a new kind of enterprise, an enterprise driven by an attitude that I labeled social consciousness. But my explanation almost necessitated the creation of a new branch of economics. Traditional theories did little to help me explain what I was trying to do with Grameen. In my mouth, I considered myself a left-of-center progressive because I did not like the way things were, nor did I like the old conservative ways. Like many Bengalis of my generation, I was influenced by Marxist economics, but I also never liked dogmas or groups who told people how to think and what standard practices to follow. I was never an Islamist. But neither could I reject my culture. I never wanted to be so radical that I could not say my prayers or show respect to the Prophet. Most of my university friends were socialists who believed that government should take care of everything. At Vanderbilt, Professor Georgescu Rogen, though not a communist, admired Marxism as a logical construct. So his teaching brought a social dimension to economics. Without the human side, economics is just as hard and dry as stone. In the United States, I saw how the market liberates the individual and allows people to be free to make personal choices. But the biggest drawback was that the market always pushes things to the side of the powerful. I thought the poor should be able to take advantage of the system in order to improve their lot. Grameen is a private sector self-help bank, and as its members gain personal wealth, they acquire water pumps, latrines, housing, education, access to healthcare, and so on. Another way to achieve this is to let a business earn profit that is then taxed by the government, and the tax can be used to provide services to the poor. But in practice, it never works that way. In real life, taxes only pay for a government bureaucracy that collects the tax and provides little or nothing to the poor. And since most government bureaucracies are not profit motivated, they have little incentive to increase their efficiency. In fact, they have a disincentive. Governments often cannot cut social services without a public outcry. So the behemoth continues blind and inefficient year after year. Behemoth is spelled Behemoth, behemoth. If Grameen does not make a profit, if our employees are not motivated and do not work hard, we will be out of business. Grameen, a for-profit bank, could also be organized as a for-profit enterprise of a non-profit organization. In any case, it cannot be organized and run purely on the basis of greed. In Grameen, we always try to make a profit so that we can cover all our costs, protect ourselves from future shocks, and continue to expand. Our concerns are focused on the welfare of our shareholders, not on the immediate cash return on their investment dollar. There is little doubt that the free market, as now organized, does not provide solutions to all social ills. It provides neither economic opportunities nor access to health and education for the poor or the elderly. Even so, I believe that government as we now know it should pull out of most things except for law enforcement, the justice system, national defense, and foreign policy, and let the private sector, a Grameenized private sector, a social consciousness driven private sector, take over its other functions almost from the start. Grameen gave rise to many controversies. Leftists said that we were a conspiracy of the Americans to plant capitalism among the poor, and that our real aim was to destroy any prospect for a revolution by robbing the poor of their despair and their rage. What you are really doing, a communist professor told me, is giving little bits of opium to the poor people so that they won't get involved in any larger political issues. With your micro nothing loans, they sleep peacefully and don't make any noise. Their revolutionary zeal, ZEAL, their revolutionary zeal cools down. Therefore, Grameen is the enemy of the revolution. On the right, the conservative Muslim clerics said we were out to destroy our culture and our religion. Whenever possible, I try to avoid grandiloquent, GRANDILOQUENT, grandiloquent philosophies and theories and isms. I take a pragmatic approach grounded in social considerations. In everything I do, I try to be practical. I rely on learning by doing while making sure that I am moving toward achieving a social objective. I'm not a capitalist in the simplistic left or right sense, but I do believe in the power of the global free market economy and in using capitalist tools. I believe in the power of the free market and the power of capital in the marketplace. I also believe that providing unemployment benefits is not the best way to address poverty. The able-bodied poor don't want or need charity. The dole, the dole only increases their misery, robs them of incentive and, more important, of self-respect. Poverty is not created by the poor, it is created by the structures of society and the policies pursued by society. Change the structure as we are doing in Bangladesh, and you will see that the poor change their own lives. Grameen's experience demonstrates that given the support of financial capital, however small, the poor are fully capable of improving their lives. Some need only $20, others $100 or $500. Some want to husk paddy, some want to make puffed rice, some make earthenware pots and pans, while others buy cows. But, and note this, development specialists around the world, not one single Grameen borrower requires any special training. They either have already received this training as part of their household chores or have acquired the necessary skills in their field of work. All they need is financial capital. Somehow we have persuaded ourselves that the capitalist economy must be fueled only by greed. This has become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Only the profit maximizers get to play in the marketplace and try their luck. People who are not motivated by profit making people who are not motivated by profit making stay away from it, condemn it, and search for alternatives. We can condemn the private sector for all its mistakes, but we cannot justify why we ourselves are not trying to change things, not trying to make things better by participating in the economy. The private sector, unlike the government, is open to everyone, even those not interested in making a profit. The challenge I set before anyone who condemns private sector business is this: if you are a socially conscious person, why don't you run your business in a way that will help achieve social objectives? I profoundly believe, as Grameen's experience over 20 years has shown, that personal gain is not the only possible fuel for free enterprise. Social goals can replace greed as a powerful motivational force. Social consciousness driven enterprises can be formidable competitors for the greed based enterprises. I believe that if we play our cards right, social consciousness driven enterprises can do very well in the marketplace. Economic protectionism, subsidies, and welfare benefits were instituted by well meaning people to soften capitalism's hard edges. I believe in the central thesis of capitalism: the economic system must be competitive. Competition is the driving force for all innovation, technological change, and improved management. Another central feature of capitalism is profit maximization. Profit maximization ensures the optimal use of scarce resources. This is the feature of capitalism that led us to create the image of a greedy, almost bloodthirsty person in the role of profit maximizer. We have presumed that the profit maximizer has no interest in achieving social objectives. We then postulated that true entrepreneurs are a rare and a special breed of people whom society should feel lucky to have. We feel so grateful to them that we give them all the privileges we can afford: credit, social recognition, tax holidays, priority access to land, market protection, and so on. I am proposing two changes to this basic feature of capitalism. The first change relates to this overblown image of a capitalist entrepreneur. To me, an entrepreneur is not an especially gifted person. I rather take the reverse view. I believe that all human beings are potential entrepreneurs. Some of us get the opportunity to express this talent, but many of us never get the chance because we were made to imagine that an entrepreneur is someone enormously gifted and different from ourselves. If all of us started to view every single human being, even the barefooted one begging in the street, as a potential entrepreneur, then we could build an economic system that would allow each man or woman to explore his or her economic potential. The old wall between entrepreneurs and laborers would disappear. It would become a matter of personal choice whether an individual wanted to become an entrepreneur or a wage earner. The second change relates to how an entrepreneur makes investment decisions. Economic theory depicts the entrepreneur as only a profit maximizer. Indeed, in some countries like the United States, corporate law requires the maximization of profits. Shareholders can sue an executive or a board of directors that uses corporate funds to benefit society as a whole rather than to maximize the profits of the shareholders. As a result, the social dimension in the thinking of the entrepreneur has been completely bypassed. For social science and society itself, this is not a good starting point. Even if social considerations have a very small role in the investment decision of an entrepreneur, we should allow them to come into play for the overall social good. Good. A human being's social considerations are qualities that can be inculcated through generating appropriate social values. If we leave no room for them in our theoretical framework, we will be encouraging human beings to behave without respect to social values. The market, of course, needs rules for the efficient allocation of resources. I propose that we replace the narrow profit maximization principle with a generalized principle. An entrepreneur maximizes a bundle consisting of two components. A. Profit, and B. Social returns, subject to the condition that profit cannot be negative. Actually, neither of these components should be negative, but I make this conceptualization in order to stay close to the existing profit maximization principle. All investment decisions can be taken within a range of options. At one extreme, the capitalist will be guided purely by the profit motive. At the other extreme, a social entrepreneur will continue to be in the market for as long as his or her socially beneficial enterprise is at least breaking even. Under this principle, a social entrepreneur could, for example, run a healthcare service for the poor if it is financially viable. Other such enterprises might include financial services for the poor, supermarket chains for the poor, educational institutions, training centers, renewable energy ventures, old age homes, institutions for handicapped people, recycling enterprises, marketing products produced by the poor, and so on. Would these types of social consciousness driven entrepreneurs be rare and difficult to find? I don't think so. The more we look for them, the more we'll meet them, and the easier we will make it for a person to become one. I assume that society is made up of many different kinds of people. At one extreme, there are capitalists seeking personal gain who want to maximize profit alone, without social considerations. They would not mind investing in an enterprise that creates negative social returns as long as it yields a maximum personal profit. At the other extreme, there are entrepreneurs who are strongly motivated by social consciousness. They are drawn to investments that maximize social returns provided the enterprises are financially viable. In between these two extremes, the bulk of entrepreneurs mix profit and social considerations in a way that takes them to their highest level of self-fulfillment. Through various means of social recognition and rewards, I am thinking of prizes, honors, public acknowledgement. Societies can influence more and more entrepreneurs to move in the direction of social consciousness driven investments. Specialized institutions can be created to help generate more and more of these investments. An individual entrepreneur and run an enterprise which pays some or no attention to social returns, but she or he can also initiate and operate one or more financially viable enterprises devoted exclusively to maximizing social returns, either as an individual or as a part of a trust or not-for-profit business organization. This scenario not only brings business people of the future closer to real life, but it also creates room for a socially and environmentally friendly global economy. Economics must show that a market economy does not necessarily have to be a playground for bloodthirsty capitalists. It can be a challenging field for all good people who want to pilot the world in the right direction. Where should one place Grameen philosophy in the spectrum of political ideologies or ideologies? Right? Left? Center? Grameen supports less government, even advocating the least government feasible, is committed to the free market and promotes entrepreneurial institutions. So it must be far right. Grameen is committed to social objectives, eliminating poverty, providing education, healthcare, and employment opportunities to the poor, achieving gender equality through the empowerment of women, ensuring the well-being of the elderly. Grameen dreams about the poverty-free, welfare-free world. Grameen is against the existing institutional framework. It opposes an economy grounded solely on greed-based enterprises. It wants to create social consciousness-driven enterprises to compete with greed-based enterprises. Grameen does not believe in laissez-faire, Laissez Faire, laissez-faire. Grameen believes in social intervention without governments getting involved in running businesses or in providing services. Social intervention should come through policy packages, encouraging businesses to move in directions desired by society. It should provide incentives to social consciousness-driven enterprises to encourage the competitive spirit and strength of the social consciousness-driven sector. All these features place Grameen on the political left. Since Grameen cannot be judged on the basis of its position in relation to the public and private sectors, it is difficult to use traditional political terms to label Grameen. Grameen is opposed to both public and private sectors as they are commonly understood. Instead, it argues for the creation of a completely new sector, what I call the social consciousness-driven private sector. Who will or can get involved in this? Social consciousness-driven people? Social consciousness can be as burning, or even more burning, a desire as greed in an individual human being. Why not make room for those people to play in the marketplace to solve social problems and to lead human lives to a higher plane of peace, equality, and creativity? The public sector has failed, or at least it is on the way out despite our best efforts. Bureaucratization cushioned, cushioned by subsidies, economic and political protection, and lack of transparency is killing it off. It has become a playground of corruption. What started out with good intentions became a road to disaster. With the demise of the public sector, the only thing left for the world is the personal gain-based private sector. This is not an inspiring prospect. If nothing else, we should remember that greed and corruption are prone to lure, L-U-R-E, uh, prone to lure each other into solid partnership at the slightest opportunity. Before the world surrenders to greed and corruption, we must seriously examine the strength of social consciousness as a contestant Critics often argue that microcredit does not contribute to the economic development of a country, and even if it does contribute something, that something is insignificant. But it all depends on what one considers economic development. Is it per capita income, per capita consumption, per capita anything? I have always disagreed with this kind of definition of development. I think it misses the essence of development. To me, changing the quality of life of the bottom 50% of the population is the essence of development. To be even more rigorous, I would define development by focusing on the quality of life of the lower 25% of the population. This is where growth and the development part their ways. This is where growth and development part their ways. Those who believe that growth and development are synonymous or move at the same speed assume that the economic layers of society are somehow linked to each other like so many railway carriages, and that one only need stoke need stoke the engine for the entire train and everyone in it to move forward at the same speed. If there is no growth, nothing moves forward. That is true. But the often used analogy of a train and linked human socio-economic strata breaks down over one significant factor. A train is drawn by a locomotive located at the front or pushed from behind, or both. But in the case of human society, each economic entity or group has its own engine. Therefore, the combined power of all the engines together pushes and pulls the economy forward. If the society fails to turn on some of the engines by simply ignoring some of those strata, the combined power of the economy will be much reduced. Worse still, if the engines of the social groups at the tail end are not turned on, those carriages, carriages, is it carriages or carriages? Those carriages may start sliding backward, independently from the rest of society, and to the detriment of everyone, including those who are better off. Microcredit pushes the entire train forward by helping each passenger in the rear or third class carriages. This cannot reduce the speed of the train, it can only increase it, which most of today's so-called development projects fail to do. Of course, investing in roads, dams, power plants, and airports increases the efficiency of the engines in the first-class carriages. Those are the fanciest and richest ones, and it enhances the train's engine capacity manifold. But whether these investments can help ignite or enhance the capacity of the engines in the subsequent carriages in all other layers and strata of society remains uncertain. Will microcredit lead to major infrastructure building? Microcredit ignites the tiny economic engines of the rejected underclass of society. Once a large number of tiny engines start working, the stage can be set for bigger things. Micro borrowers and micro savers can be organized to own big enterprises, even infrastructure companies. Grameen has created a number of companies for speeding up the process of overcoming poverty. Some of the most exciting of these enterprises are described in the next chapter. This is the end of chapter 11. Now I'm going to continue to read the next chapter right now. Chapter 12, Beyond Microcredit, A New World of Grameen Enterprises. In 1985, I received a telephone call from the Permanent Secretary of the Fisheries Ministry of Bangladesh. "Dr. Yunus," said the voice on the other end of the line, "we have not met, but I know you very well through your work. I wanted to discuss a fisheries project with you." Have you ever visited Sirajganj? Yes, I have, I answered, but only in limited areas. We are just expanding our work in Bogra. Maybe Bogra. You must visit the Fisheries Ministry project in Nimgachi. Nimgachi, Nimgachi, an area. We have nearly 1,000 large ponds that were originally excavated by the Pal kings, local Hindu rulers of the Pal dynasty, over 1,000 years ago to provide drinking water for the people and for the king's cattle herds. They have silted up, silted, they have silted up. Our project was supposed to re-excavate them for fish farming. What happened to the project? I asked. That's the tragedy. I recently visited the place to find out why the British Foreign Aid Agency refused to give us more money for the project. I was stunned, stunned. I was stunned by the blatant corruption and mismanagement. Now I have a request for you. What is that? My request is that you take over the project. You can do whatever you want. We'll stay out of it. What am I going to do with hundreds of ponds? Please don't turn down my request. At least make a trip to the project area. You will be inspired to see the beauty of these ponds and the potential they hold for the country. We are a bank. We don't know how to farm fish. Yes, I know that. If you think you can't do it, at least take the ponds for safekeeping. The way I see it, if they remain in government hands, nothing will be left of them. The secretary was both accusing his own staff of corruption and trying to protect the ponds, though I was reluctant to get involved in something I had no expertise in. I was also tempted by the challenge. I discussed it with my colleagues. They also felt that if the government genuinely wanted to give us the land, we should take it. A week later, I got another telephone call from the secretary, but I did not want to change my position yet. So I told him that my answer was still no. I'm calling you for another reason, he replied. I'm convening a meeting on the future policy direction of the Fisheries Ministry. I want you there to help us formulate our ideas. If I attend, you will again bring up the subject of the Nimgashi project and pressure me to take it over, I said. I give you my word, I won't bring up the subject of Nimgashi at the meeting. I laughed and agreed. I laughed because I did not believe that he would keep his promise. I agreed because I wanted to meet this man who had so much confidence in me, even though we had never met. There were about a dozen people at the Secretariat's meeting. Half of them were top government officials from the Fisheries Ministry. The other half came from universities and research institutes. The meeting went on for 2 hours. The secretary did not utter a word about the Nimgashi project. Just as the meeting was about to conclude, the secretary leaned over and whispered in my ear, "Could you stay for a while so that we can have a cup of tea and a one-on-one discussion?" When everyone had left, tea and snacks were brought in for us. Grinning at me, Grinning, grinning at me, the secretary said, "Did you see? I kept my word. I did not bring up the subject of Nimgashi during the meeting. Now that the meeting is over, I am free to bring it up, am I not?" He narrated the history of the project, the corruption of his staff, his plans about handing the ponds over to Grameen. He said he would be willing to give us the project on our own terms. He then handed me a stack of reports to help me make up my mind. As I returned to my office, I decided that we should go for it. Here was a most unusual secretary who truly had the goods of the country at heart. When the government wants to help the poor, it usually comes up with a policy of free distribution of money, land, or other assets. But along the way from the government to the poor, the free goods rarely reach the poor as more powerful people line up to take advantage of the distribution system. We wanted to reverse this trend, and here was the opportunity. How could I not help the secretary? How could we go wrong in taking over properties from the government? Fish is an important source of protein for Bengalis, and fishing is a significant income generating activity. Here was an opportunity to transfer significant assets to the landless poor. The unexcavated ponds could be combined with the untapped abilities of the local poor to create a bold chemistry for improving the quality of their lives. If we succeeded in this venture, we would not only help the locals to feed, clothe, and house themselves, but also help them become major economic players. We decided to take on the challenge. I wrote a long memo to the secretary agreeing to take over the project, but only under certain rigorous conditions. I wanted a 99-year lease with low annual rent, and I wanted the government to withdraw all its staff as soon as the handing over took place. I also said we required a detailed list of everything that was being granted to us. I sent the memo, and the secretary called me the next day saying that he agreed to all my conditions, but that government rules would allow us only a 25-year lease. I replied that that would be acceptable to us. The secretary sounded relieved. It was strange. In my experience with Grameen, I had only met with Mr. No S in government offices. Having someone at the highest level of bureaucracy actually seek us out and agree to our conditions was a totally new experience for me. The secretary moved with lightning speed to get everything done. His proposal went to the president and the land ministry for approval. It was quite a bureaucratic feat, yet the whole thing was achieved within a couple of months. In January 1986, we signed the agreement with the government regarding the transfer of the Nimgashi project to the Grameen Bank. The project consisted of 783 ponds of various sizes and shapes, with a combined water body of 1,666 acres, spread over 4 subdistricts in Pabna and Sirajganj. In 1988, the government leased us more ponds for a total of 808. We began our adventure in the new world of fisheries with high expectations, but we soon hit rough waters. In 1987, devastating floods hit Bangladesh and caused us serious losses. The following year, we suffered the worst flood in a century. More losses were added. Predator fish remained in the ponds, and our efforts to eradicate them were neutralized by the floods, which brought in new predators. We inherited so few nurseries and rearing ponds that we had no alternative but to stock our excess hatchlings directly in the ponds. This led to a high mortality rate. The ponds had uneven bottoms, which led to turbidity, high acidity, sedimentation of harmful organic matter, and other problems. And though incidents of theft greatly decreased, poaching, P-O-S-C-H-I-N-G, poaching persisted, especially in remote areas. We gave up. We gave up hope for production on the scale we had initially planned, but more disheartening than the natural disaster was the human resistance to our efforts. From the beginning, the old bureaucracy and local vested interests did not accept our presence with grace. The government officials who had been entrusted with the operation of the project were bitter about the decision to let Grameen run their show. They complained that they were being discredited. Their pride was wounded, and they felt that Grameen had been brought in to enjoy the fruits of their labor. Many of these officials also fanned anti-Grameen sentiment among the local people. Local leaders of major political parties were also antagonistic. Leftist leaders argued that development was the job of the government, not of a private bank. But the real source of their anger toward us stemmed from the fact that the politicians were no longer able to exercise influence on the management of the fisheries. In one area, a leading political party organized anti-Grameen demonstrations and public meetings. Leaders tried to convince villagers that we were a foreign organization intent on exploiting the locals and remitting our profits overseas. The mood of the people ranged from skeptical to openly rebellious. There were days when our staff could not step out of the residential complex for fear of attack. But even during the worst, most tense standoffs, we were confident that we could turn the situation around and win the people's confidence. To that end, we held meetings with the locals and appealed for their support. We promised that proper management of the ponds would benefit not only the landless but the community at large. To prove our good faith, we organized some 40 preschool learning centers for poor children. Eventually, the patience and sincerity of our staff began to pay off, and the initial animosity and suspicion subsided. The ultra-left, underground armed revolutionary groups that burned down our offices and forced our staff to leave the villages at gunpoint now disappeared. We could finally concentrate on the production of fish. The work was difficult. Without first establishing a technical, physical, and managerial base for production and effective control over the ponds, we could not begin to help the local poor. As our staff members had no background in fisheries, we enrolled them in crash courses on fish farming. We sent them to China to learn about pond management and hatchery operations. Eventually, our large initial capital investment and staff training began to pay off. We invited the local poor to become our business partners. They contributed their labor and guarded the ponds against poaching while we provided all the technology and management. The harvest was divided on a 50-50 basis. Our partners received a good annual income. From this agreement, we struggled to cover our costs. We also adopted a bonus scheme to boost production. If fish from a pond exceeded a predetermined target, the staff was rewarded. The poor, who had stolen fish under the government's management, now became our best farmers, protectors, and partners out of self-interest in their profit share. In the future, as we overcome our technical, financial, and managerial challenges, we hope to create for-profit subsidiaries of our not-for-profit fisheries foundation. The shares in these subsidiaries will be owned by the members of fisheries groups who now participate in the 50-50 production partnership. If this model of management and ownership works, we will extend it throughout Bangladesh to revitalize additional idle ponds. If we can combine our microcredit and pond management programs, we will mobilize two hitherto under underutilized resources that Bangladesh has in abundance: vast numbers of landless poor people and 1.5 million fish water ponds. Grameen's experience with fisheries demonstrates that new grassroots systems can be designed and developed from scratch so that the poor can better control sophisticated technology and share in a macroeconomic project. Technology is an essential prerequisite for raising productivity, but it must be directed so that the increased production does not simply end up in the hands of the wealthy. In Bangladesh, there is no reason why people should remain poor. Our problem is one of management, not lack of resources. With the proper management framework, the rich resources of Bangladesh can solve our poverty problem once and for all. One such resource is textiles. Bangladesh has a long tradition of making fine hand-woven fabrics such as muslin, muslin that for centuries were in demand by the European courts. Unfortunately, with the advent of the Industrial Revolution in Europe and the sudden boom of machine-made fabrics in England, the demand for Bengali cloth died down. In their enthusiasm to gain control of the market, our colonial masters placed a ban on handloom weaving in Bangladesh and even punished those weavers who violated the ban by chopping off their thumbs. Despite such restrictions, handloom weavers passed their skill on from generation to generation. When the Indian independence movement began, one of its expressions of rebellion was the boycott of British fabric and the use only of locally produced cloth. Today in Bangladesh there are 1 million handloom weavers desperately looking for a market for their products. Handloom weavers have always been extremely poor. They make beautiful fabrics and manufacture the most gorgeous saris, most gorgeous, gorgeous saris, but their women cannot afford to wear them. Their children go naked. Many of the women who join Grameen come from handloom weavers' families. In handloom villages, we always had repayment problems during a particularly lean month of the year for the handloom trade. This lean month lies between two agricultural harvest seasons when people run out of purchasing power. Grameen's deputy managing director, Khalid Shams, worried greatly about the repayment difficulties of the weaving families. He took great pride in our ancient tradition of weaving, and he wanted to see it regain its rightful place in the economy of Bangladesh. Khalid wanted to understand the weavers' problems by living with them and experiencing their daily struggle, so he lived for a week in the Grameen branch with the highest density of weavers. He became convinced that the weavers' number one problem was not being able to buy yarn at a fair price. To solve this problem, he made the civil servant in charge of the textile ministry. But whereas getting permission from the ministry to buy yarn directly from the factory was not difficult, actually receiving the delivery from the factory was quite another matter. We learned the hard way about how the yarn market in Bangladesh works, how textile trade union leaders and a handful of wholesalers control the price and supply of yarn. YARN, yarn. Khalid also discovered that Bangladesh was importing roughly $150 million worth of an Indian fabric called Madras check. We were shocked. While we were trying to create a local market for our own handloom fabrics, we were importing $150 million worth of fabric from our neighbor. We were told that the Indian fabric was of a very high quality that could not be matched by our local weavers. But when Khalid circulated some samples from Belkuhi, Belkuchi, from Belkuchi, where some of the best lungis are made, the garment factories and buying houses all agreed that our fabrics were superior to the imported Indian cloth. Still, the buyers did not show any interest in purchasing this local fabric. It was too difficult. They explained that they could not go door to door to each single weaver in Bangladesh to acquire the hundreds of thousands of yards they needed. Yards. Y-A-R-D-S. Yards they needed. It was much easier to place a huge order with the Indian suppliers who could provide them with whatever they needed, right on time. Khalid tried to interest private businesses in organizing the production and distribution of handloom fabrics for the garment industry. As no one showed any interest, Grameen decided to move in by itself. We would play the role of middleman and supplier. We would accept orders from exporters and take responsibility for the quality of the cloth and its delivery. In 1993, we created an independent, non-stock, non-for-profit company we called Grameen Grameen Initiatives, to link the traditional handloom weavers with the export-oriented garment industry. The weavers, thrilled to participate in the export market, created a beautiful new line of fabrics. We called it Grameen Check, Check. It was not easy to enter the international marketplace. We had no textile experience. Khalid worked very hard to put together a team and learn the ropes of the business. Grameen is not doing anything fancy. All we do is promote the product, take orders, and work as a marketing agent for independent home-based weavers. We pass on the specifications of the orders to the weavers. Give them the best quality yarn so that they do not wait for working capital, and ensure that they meet the quality controls and deadlines. With our help, weavers do not have to worry about procurement of orders or the marketing of their products. Our method works. During our first year, total sales came to $2.5 million. 3 years later, they stood at $15 million. Sales are still growing. As a product, Grameen Check has great market potential. It is hand-woven, 100% cotton, and very attractive. In Paris in February 1996, by courtesy of the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, we held a fashion show of garments designed and presented by a talented Bangladeshi model, Bibi Russell. Paris fashion personalities, magazines, and other media immediately took up the designs. Today, 8,000 handloom weavers produce Grameen Check, which sells in Italy, France, the United Kingdom, and Germany. With all the unemployed weavers in Bangladesh, we could easily raise the production level to 1 million yards per week. We are working to interest more buyers in Europe and North America. When we were introducing Grameen Check, buyers asked if we could also supply checked flannel, F-L-A-N-N-E-L, checked flannel. Realizing that we would need our own machines to convert the Grameen Check to Grameen flannel, we teamed up with a friend of ours, Dr. Zafarullah Chaudhary, who had recently purchased land for a textile factory. This factory, known as Gonosastia Grameen Textile Mills Limited, went into production in 1998. Having successfully branched into flannel, we are now trying to produce fabric from jute mixed with cotton. Jute, a natural fiber grown abundantly in Bangladesh, was once used exclusively as a packing material. Grameen is finding new uses for jute by combining it with cotton or silk to make fabrics used in home furnishings. Soon, new technology will provide ways of using jute for clothing at a very competitive price. Our hope is that as our fabric production becomes more diversified and the market expands, our weavers will receive a beautiful Bengali craft. To this end, we are cooperating with Grameen Foundation USA to open the American market to Grameen textiles. GF USA is helping us form partnership with individuals and companies in the United States. A pleasant enterprise during this whole process has been the positive response from the domestic market. All of a sudden, Grameen check has become a household name and a social statement. To wear Grameen check indicates pride in Bangladesh arts and heritage. To cope with this burgeoning domestic market, we created another company, Grameen Shamogri, Grameen Products, which focuses its attention on finished goods made from Grameen check fabrics as well as other Bangladeshi handicrafts. Khalid was not willing to stop at textiles. His vision for Grameen was far grander. Grander, far grander. One day in 1994, he introduced me to Iqbal Qadir, a young Bangladeshi American, a graduate of Oberlin College. Khalid said, "Iqbal has an idea." He says, "We can apply for a license to operate a cellular telephone company in Bangladesh. We can take cellular telephones into the villages." It sounded like an exciting idea. Step by step, we gathered information on cellular phones. In 1996, the government of Bangladesh issued 3 cellular licenses, including one to us. We signed the license agreement on November 11, 1996, and I announced to the press that we would launch our service on March 26, 1997, Bangladesh's Independence Day. We formed 2 independent companies, one for profit, Grameen Phone, another not for profit, Grameen Telecom. Grameen Phone received the license. The company is building a nationwide cellular network throughout urban Bangladesh. Grameen Telecom would then buy bulk airtime from Grameen Phone and retail it through Grameen borrowers in rural villages. One Grameen borrower in each of the 68,000 villages would become the telephone lady of the village. She sells the service of the telephone to the villagers by operating what we call a village pay phone. Thus, the village would become connected to the world through one poor woman with access to the most modern communication system available. As planned, Grameen Phone launched its service on March 26, 1997. The opening ceremony was held at the Prime Minister's office. Using a Grameen phone, our Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina called the Prime Minister of Norway, who was enjoying his holiday in the north of Norway. From our end, the Prime Minister said, "How is the weather up there?" "It is very cold here. It is 36 degrees Celsius below zero," answered the Norwegian. "How can you enjoy yourself in weather like that? You would better come here for your next holiday. We have a pleasant 32 degrees Celsius in Dhaka." After this international call, a domestic call came in for our Prime Minister. It was a Grameen borrower. Laili Begum from the village of Patira, north of Dhaka, who was calling the Prime Minister from her cellular phone. Laili Begum was Grameen's first telephone lady, and since then she has earned a substantial income by letting others pay to use her phone. In 1997, Bangladesh had just about the lowest telephone density in the world, one phone per 300 inhabitants. In a country of 120 million people, we had only 400,000 telephones, and these were all centered in cities, mostly in Dhaka. As many as one quarter of all phones were out of commission at any given time. With such scarcity, working phones became a symbol of power and authority in Bangladesh. People would wait for years to get a telephone. The more telephones people had on their desk, the more important they were thought to be. A cellular phone was an indicator of great wealth. Grameen phone now has 850,000 cellular phone subscribers in Bangladesh, of which 24,000 are village phones, operated by the village phone ladies. While the number of village phones is small in relation to the total, the airtime usage on village phones represents 17% of total airtime use of Grameen phone. We now offer the cheapest cellular rate in the world, 9 cents per minute for airtime during peak hours and 6.7 cents per minute during off-peak hours. One challenge to our cellular phone program is the lack of electricity. Many villages in Bangladesh are not connected to the national grid. To introduce cellular phones to those villages, we are bringing in solar energy. We created the Grameen Shakti Energy, a non-profit company dedicated to developing forms of renewable energy. Grameen Shakti is currently experimenting with solar photovoltaic home systems, battery stations, wind turbines, and gasifiers. Gasifiers turn wood or agricultural waste into gas, which is used to generate electricity. Our phone network has also led us to experiment with the internet. Grameen CyberNet, an internet service provider, hopes to create international jobs for the children of Grameen borrowers. These boys and girls will be able to serve companies around the world in various capacities, from their own village homes or community office spaces. By bringing internet facilities into distant rural areas, many labor-intensive enterprises can be located in those otherwise isolated rural areas. These enterprises include data entry services, data management businesses, global answering services, typing services, transcription services, secretarial services, accounting services, and so on. Finally, a non-profit internet service provider, Grameen Communications, will make the internet available to educational and research institutions in Bangladesh. Many of these institutions do not have reliable telephone lines or the budget to afford internet facilities. Grameen Communications will offer them packages through which they will solve these problems. By joining the 20th century late in the game, Grameen borrowers will benefit from the latest innovations without wasting time or money on the earlier, less efficient and more costly technology. If used properly, technology can help break down structural barriers, distances, and cultural differences. It can introduce rapid social change by linking isolated rural women to friends and distant relatives. Cynics, cynics and critics of our ambitious project claim that high tech will be wasted on the Stone Age mentality of most of our borrowers. The truth is, we are finding quite the opposite. Without the benefit of a telephone, our villagers waste a lot of time, money, and effort getting messages to um, dispersed family members. Before, in an emergency situation, if they needed to tell a brother or daughter living in Dhaka to come home, they had to send a messenger in person. That messenger would stop working or studying and take a bus rickshaw, or train to his or her destination. Measured by this, ordeal, measured by this ordeal, WORDEAL, measured by this ordeal, the cost of not having access to a phone is obviously quite high. Another criticism we hear is that the rural poor do not need the luxury of a telephone. But to our telephone lady, the telephone is a very real and practical way to earn money. Besides, a telephone helps Grameen borrowers improve their existing businesses by giving them more information and greater flexibility to buy and sell their products. Without a phone, a borrower who needs to buy raw materials must send a messenger to ask the price and delivery date of her goods. She may have to send her messenger to 3 or 4 different suppliers. And this can take weeks. With a cellular phone, she can make her calls in the space of half an hour, put in her orders, and immediately increase the profitability of her business. There is no reason to assume that the Grameen telephone lady will limit herself to renting out her telephone. As technology and energy sources evolve, she may become a sort of one-stop communication center, providing her fellow villagers with fax, email, and ATM capabilities. Today, we are working with high-tech companies in the United States and Europe to develop a prototype of a cyber kiosk, cyber kiosk that will allow borrowers to keep abreast of new technologies and to provide these services profitably to the people in their community. One would think that with all these expansions and modernizations, Grameen has solved many of Bangladesh's fundamental problems. Not true. In Grameen, we have noticed that as borrowers' income increases, they spend more and more on combating malnutrition diseases, infant and maternal mortality, and other health problems. Given the abominable condition of public health services, our borrowers often give in to the temptation to spend all their new money on traditional healers and sham doctors. SHAM, sham doctors. If we could persuade our borrowers to take the money they give to traditional healers and give it instead to a Grameen-sponsored health program, we might provide them with modern and effective health services for almost the same amount of money. That process has begun. We are now trying to make health care available to all members of Grameen families and to all villagers who are not Grameen borrowers on a self-financing, cost recovery basis. We ask our borrowers to pay a fixed amount of $3 per family per year as a premium to a health insurance program. Each time they see a doctor, borrowers must pay a nominal amount less than 3 cents. Laboratory services and medication are available at a discount. Grameen Health Program is also operating eye campus in the villages, where trained doctors perform, among other services, intraocular lens implantation for cataract patients, CATARSET, for cataract patients. The cost of the operation is only 1,000 taka, which is less than US dollar 20. During the first 3 years of operation, the Grameen Health Program recovered about 60% of the cost of providing these medical services If we can organize a nationwide franchise, we could turn Grameen's healthcare into a strong, competitive, and sustainable pro-people enterprise. One reason we are so acutely aware of health problems is that they can destroy even our brightest successes. Morally Safer 60 Minutes program of 1989 featured one borrower near Chittagong who, thanks to Grameen loans, has risen from being a street beggar to owning 7 cows, a large plot of land, a new house, a modern latrine, and a three-wheeled baby taxi for her husband, and ensuring a school education for all her children. Morally Safer called her the picture of contentment and human success, yet when I met her and her husband again in 1966, I could barely recognize them. He had contracted a stomach illness. He had contracted a stomach illness that was never properly diagnosed. To pay for his medical treatment, the couple had sold off their taxi, their land, and their cattle. She was so frail and tired, she did not trust herself to take a new loan. All they had left were 4 chickens. I mentioned these cases to indicate how difficult a road we have ahead of us. Grameen is not just a series of success stories. There are constant potholes, potholes. There are constant potholes along the way. Part of our ability to alleviate poverty depends on our willingness to admit failure and to help ensure that the failures do not happen again. Needless to say, microcredit cannot solve society's every problem, but it can help to support those who would otherwise fall through the cracks. In our healthcare expansion, for example, we worried a great deal about how to ensure that Grameen borrowers would build up savings for retirement. We did not want our members to become dependent on their children, the government, Grameen, or businesses that they were no longer able to run. After years of hard work in their micro businesses, we wanted them to live their final years in dignified retirement. In place of social security, we decided to offer them shares of successful Grameen companies, non-Grameen companies, and Grameen mutual funds. Basically, when a Grameen company such as the Grameen Fisheries Foundation reaches a profitable level, we transform part of it into a for-profit company, Count or Count, COOWNED, for-profit company Count by Grameen borrowers and the general public through stock options. In most cases, shares yield dividends and also appreciate in value. To meet a sudden crisis, borrowers may sell some shares for immediate cash. A new Grameen entity called Grameen Securities Management Company facilitates these financial transactions. Interestingly, the Dhaka office of the now defunct Hong Kong based investment company Peregrine asked us to merge with it as an alternative to closing down its Bangladesh operations. We did not go for it, but we interpreted the interest as a powerful statement about the potential strength of our local investment organization. With a base of 2 million families, all involved in micro business and interested in investing their savings, we have a tremendous untapped untapped market for financial and investment services. This is the end of chapter 12. On the next episode, I will read the next chapter, chapter 13, Grameen Bank 2. But until then, thanks for your curiosity. and desire to listen and learn new things.